How can someone catch a ghost? How can you capture a killer who stayed out of reach for 31 years? Wichita, Kansas was terrorized by a sexual serial killer from 1974 until 2005 when he was finally caught. He was known as BTK. The BTK Strangler self-named himself after his MO: bind, torture, and kill. He taunted the police by sending letters about his victims, how he acted, and how he would choose and kill his future victims. When he was finally caught, he was living just outside Wichita. He was the father of 2 children and was a church leader. His real name was Dennis Lynn Rader. Dennis Rader was born on March 9, 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, but grew up in Wichita. He was the first of 4 sons of William, a former U.S. Marine, and Dorothy Rader. He had a normal childhood without any abuse involved, but he was not an average child. According to his journals, his strange behavior started to manifest at an early age. He lived at his paternal grandparents' farm until around 5 years old. There, he was mesmerized by how his grandmother prepared the chicken for frying. She was twisting their necks and letting the bodies spasm to death on the ground. Rader wrote in his journal that what he saw made him feel something like sexual arousal, and he enjoyed the feeling very much. His friends described him as a quiet kid, never standing out. But he acted like that not because he was shy. He had other reasons. Rader wrote in his journals that he was already obsessed with strings and chords by the age of 9. Mummies, in particular, were one of his greatest passions. He was aroused by the thought of being wrapped up tight in all those strips of cloth, to feel the pressure they put on someone's body. One of his fantasies was about finding a girl and binding her arms and legs together, almost like a mummy. The desire to wrap up a victim or have someone wrap him up grew bigger and bigger inside him, until one afternoon when he decided to act. He went into a secluded area of his neighborhood, laid down on the ground, tied his ankles with a rope, and next, he passed his hands through a slip knot and tied them too. He laid there, alone, all afternoon. He felt aroused like never before. It finally happened on one of his escapades. After a few minutes, he ejaculated. Soon after, he started to tie himself up every chance he got. He wrote about enjoying imagining himself to be helpless and weak, always just minutes away from death, entirely at the mercy of some evil stranger who possessed complete control over him. Rader was not a very bright student. He did the minimum amount of work necessary required to finish his studies. His interest was in creating more ways to fulfill his fantasies. By the time he reached high school, he was a master at disguising himself. None of his violent self was ever seen by the people around him. He was often described as boring. Rader had none of the typical outside behavior a serial killer might have. He preferred to be boring than attract any attention to him. Rader's row of killings started with animals. He used to catch them, tie them up, and watch them slowly die. He used to masturbate and ejaculate on their bodies. In August of 1966, after 1 year of college, he signed up for the Air Force. He underwent basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. He was sent to Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, where he attended technical school and specialized in radio communications. After a few years, he became a sergeant. The feeling of being able to control people, was addicting to him. He was engaging in sex with prostitutes, and he lost his virginity at that time. In 1970, after 4 years in the Air Force, Rader returned to Wichita. It was the time his mother introduced him to Paula Dietz, and by May of 1971, they were married. Rader passed from killing animals to killing humans in January of 1974, when he murdered the Otero family. He strangled Joseph Otero, 38, his wife, Julie, 34, and their son Joey, 9. In the basement, it was discovered the body of Josephine, 11. She was hanging from a water pipe and was partially undressed. Down her leg and on the floor under her, a large amount of semen was discovered. Rader would later describe in his journal how he managed to restrict the entire family, and how he got the young Josephine in the basement, the feelings he got when he saw her hanging there, the release he found masturbating while she was giving her final breath. In April of 1974, Catherine Bright, 21, was stabbed to death in her home. Her brother Kevin managed to escape and call the police, despite being shot twice in the head. The first contact between BTK and the local force power was made in October. He sent a detailed letter to a local paper about the murder of the Otero family. Paula gave birth to their first child, Brian Howard Rader, in July of 1975. Dennis was working as a construction and installation supervisor with ADT Security by that time. The firm specialized in burglary alarms for residences and businesses. In 1977, he made 2 more killings. In March, Shirley Vaughn, 24, was found strangled. She had her hands and feet bound. In December, Nancy Fox, 25, met the same fate. Rader called the police to report Nancy's crime. In January of 1978, he sent a second letter to the local paper, but was found 2 weeks later. In February, he sent another letter to a local TV station, bragging about the killings of Vaughn, Fox, and Bright. In June of 1978, the second child of the Rader couple was born, a daughter named Carrie Lynn Rader. In April of 1979, he waited inside the home of a 63-year-old woman, but eventually left before she returned home. After a few days, he sent her a letter along with the scarf he took from her house. He told her he chose her to be his next victim, but he grew tired of waiting for her to come home. 6 years later, in April of 1985, he made his next victim, Maureen Hedge, a 53-year-old widow who lived only 5 doors down from him. Rader strangled her with his gloved hands, an error from his part. He felt he didn't fulfill his fantasy. She died too quickly. Dennis then did something different from his usual M.O. He took her body and placed it in the basement of the Christ Lutheran Church, the same church he went to with his family every Sunday. 1 year later, on September 16, 1986, he wrote in his journal about another victim. Vicki Wegerle, a 20-year-old mother of 2 who had no chance against him. In July of 1988, Rader was fired by ADT. In 1989, he was hired as a field supervisor for the U.S. Census Bureau, and by 1990, he was promoted to the role of state supervisor. Rader's last known victim was Dolores Davis. She was taken from her home on January 19, 1991. In 1991, he started to work for the Wichita suburb of Park City as a compliance supervisor. According to the reports, he had a rigorous set of rules. He used to measure the height of people's lawns and chase stray animals with a tranquilizer gun. He was also a Boy Scout troop leader and president of his church council. He remained silent until 2004, when stories about the Otero family resurfaced, marking their 30-year death anniversary. He wanted his name to be feared again. In March of 2004, he sent a letter to the Wichita Eagle claiming he was the one who killed Vicki Wegerle in 1986. He also sent them photos of the crime scene and a copy of her driver's license. Until February 25, 2005, when he was arrested, he sent numerous letters and pieces of evidence to the authorities. The breakthrough in the long case of BTK was made on February 16, 2005, when he sent a floppy disk to the police. They managed to extract two critical clues from that disk: Christ Lutheran Church and Dennis. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Rader pleaded guilty to all 10 charges of murder filed against him. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences. He is currently incarcerated at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, and his earliest parole is set for the year 2180.